Let's continue in the book of prayer. Level 3. We have reached the chapter of additional conditions of prayer. But before I read this chapter, I want to share an update with you here about night prayer, Qiyamul Layl, which is performed 2 by 2, meaning 2 rakats by 2 rakats. Yani 2 rakats with a salam followed by 2 rakats with a salam for an unlimited number in the depth of the night. Yani this is after Isha. It's being the best voluntary prayer according to Muslims hadith. أفضل الصلاة بعد الفريضة. It's, which means the best. It's the, if you translate the hadith literally, it's the best prayer after the obligatory prayer. That's a hadith. So it's being the best voluntary prayer according to Muslims hadith does not mean that it's the very best prayer. And I did mention that for you last week, but I didn't go into details. I mentioned for you that doesn't mean it's the very best prayer. But if you want, though, you're still going to say it's the best prayer so that you don't contradict the hadith. Like, for example, didn't the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that the worst sin that one could commit is shirk, paganism? Yes. The scholars still say the worst sin is atheism. So you're not going to say, though, shirk is not the worst sin. Yani, what I mean to say is you're not going to contradict the hadith. You're not going to say the opposite of the hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the worst sin is shirk. You're not going to say shirk is not the worst sin. You don't want to say you don't want to contradict the hadith, but you can give explanatory words to the hadith. So you'll say, shirk is the worst sin, meaning in the realm of the worst. And the Prophet mentioned shirk in particular because it's most common. And that's mostly what he and his companions were dealing with as far as blasphemy. And that's not a denial that atheism is even worse. But shirk and atheism are both the worst. In one, it could be worse than the other, though. Both of them are the worst. Or if there's a hadith, for example, that says that Abu Dhar or Abu Hurairah, I think it's Abu Dhar, is the most honest person or the most honest of people. So you're not going to say he's not the most honest of people because the Prophet is more honest than he is. Meaning you're not going to just say the opposite of the hadith. Rather, you're going to just say some explanatory words. So there's a hadith that Qiyamul Layl is afdalu salatin ba'da al-faridah. Very literally, the best prayer after obligatory prayer. So don't say it's not the best prayer after obligatory prayer. Don't say what's contrary to the hadith, but you can say, for example, it's not the very best prayer after the obligatory prayer. Or you might say, it's the best prayer after the obligatory prayer, meaning in the realm of the best prayers, even if some are better. So this night prayer being the best voluntary prayer according to Muslims hadith does not mean it is the very best optional prayer. Even if some explainers of Abu Shuja' cite that hadith without commenting. So all this information we're reading in the first place, where is it from? Mostly it's from explanations of Abu Shuja' merged together and then slightly rearranged. And that's why we're always citing Abu Shuja'. His text is the nucleus of what we're reading. And it's such a famous text, as you know, has many, many, many explanations. And I had the opportunity to take several of those explanations. So I just was putting them together in one translated document and then arranging it according to what I saw fit. And some of the explainers of Abu Shuja', they mentioned this hadith without commenting on it. Meaning, when Abu Shuja' talked about the night prayer, some of the explainers doing their job as explainers, were elaborating and giving details and producing hadiths and sayings of scholars and stuff like that. So when they brought this hadith about night prayer, afdalu salati ba'da al-faridah, is the best prayer after the obligatory prayer, they didn't comment. They just mentioned the hadith and kept going. So then, if you don't take more information, then you might think that it is the very best optional prayer after the obligatory prayers, because the hadith was presented to you and no details were given to you. And so I want to share with you some details. I want to share with you some of what Sheikh Zakaria al-Ansari said. He said the most emphatic sunnah prayers are, he started with Eid prayer. He's saying this is the most emphatic, the most emphasized sunnah prayer, because the order to perform it is emphasized, and because of the difference of opinion about it being a communal obligation. Some scholars out of the Shafi'i school said Eid prayer is a communal obligation. So you take that saying with saying, according to other scholars, that it's sunnah, then if you put those two together, one saying that it's sunnah, one saying that it's communal obligation, if you put those two together, then that gives it more importance than other recommended prayers, because some scholars even deem it a communal obligation. Yani, they even deem it a type of obligation. He said, then for solar eclipse, then for lunar eclipse, due to being concerned about missing them by the sun and the moon clearing up. Meaning, when the eclipse time comes in, you want to hurry up and pray before the eclipse goes away. So that makes it more important, more urgent, like a scheduled prayer with a time limit. He said, then for seeking rain, because of being emphasized by the recommendation of congregation for it. Meaning, rain prayer is a sunnah prayer, but prayed in congregation. So being a sunnah prayer prayed in congregation makes it higher than some other sunnah prayers that are not prayed in congregation. Then the witr prayer, to avoid the difference of opinion of those who speculated its obligation. That's the Hanafis. The Hanafis said witr, some of them, Yani Abu Hanifa himself, said witr prayer is wajib, speculated obligation. Shafi'i said witr prayer is sunnah. So putting those two together gives witr prayer more importance. Then the two optional fajr rak'ats, due to Muslims report. What's Muslims report? Rak'at al-fajr khayrun min ad-dunya wa ma fiha. The two optional fajr rak'ats are better than the world and everything in it. Then the rest of the rawatib prayers, because of their being emphasized by the Prophet's consistency in performing them. Then the Taraweeh prayer, because congregation is sanctioned for it. Then the Duha prayer, since it has a scheduled time. Then what is related to a deed, like the 2 rak'ats of tawaf, or the 2 rak'ats of ihram, or the 2 rak'ats of saluting the masjid. He says here, then night prayer, because of Muslims report. أفضل الصلاة بعد الفريضة صلاة الليل. The best prayer after the obligatory is the night prayer. Then the rest of the unrestricted voluntary prayers. So that's that. Because some people were concerned about the accuracy of the statement, the way we read it last time. So now it's updated, alhamdulillah. And now we're going to continue where we left off. The author says, additional conditions of prayer. So the word additional means more than what's already been mentioned. And you might say, wait, we never even covered conditions of prayer yet. We were talking about prayer times, and we covered the hadith of Jibreel, and we covered each prayer time one by one. We talked about when it's haram to pray, and we talked about shortening and combining. We never even covered a chapter on conditions of prayer. So why additional conditions of prayer? Because in all of the talk that we've gone through, there have been conditions of prayer sprinkled here and there. So if you study, then you'll find some conditions of prayer have already been mentioned, just not under a title for conditions of prayer. Now we want to focus on conditions of prayer, and we have a title specifically for conditions of prayer. And since we already mentioned a few, then these are additional conditions of prayer. Al-Hisni, he explained Abu Shuja'. His explanation of Abu Shuja' is called Kifayatul Akhyar. We read through some of Lubbul Kifaya, which is a summary of that. He said a shart, a condition or prerequisite, linguistically is a sign. That's what Al-Hisni said. However, according to the dictionaries Al-Misbah and Al-Mukhtar, the word for sign is sharat, not shart. Sharat with two fathahs. So Al-Hisni said a sharat is a sign, but the dictionaries say not sharat, sharat is a sign. Al-Basir, and he did an explanation of Abu Shuja'. It's called An-Nihaya. My personal opinion's the nicest one out of all the ones that I've used to compile this. He said linguistically, a shart is to make a future matter contingent upon another future matter. To make a future matter contingent upon another future matter. Like, for example, if someone said to his wife, if you leave the house, you are divorced. So if you leave the house, that means in the future, after what I'm saying right now. If after I say what I'm saying now, you do this, that means for the future. Then also in the future, such and such will happen. If you leave the house, you will be divorced, for example. So Al-Basir says a condition is to make a future matter contingent, dependent upon another future matter. And that is what is intended here. Yani, this is the meaning of shart. This is the linguistic meaning of shart that is relevant. Yani, the meaning of contingency, the meaning of dependency. This is what we're looking for. But the dictionary Al-Maqayi says that the meaning of sign or indication is still relevant to the word shart. Technically, a shart is that which, if it is missing, validity is missing. If it is missing, whatever that condition is, then the validity of the deed is missing. But without being an integral, because an integral is an actual element of the deed. A condition or prerequisite is not an element of the deed itself. It's something outside of the deed, but needed for the deed to be valid. And its presence alone does not dictate presence or absence. That statement, I'm not going to explain it. Maybe another time. The commonality between a condition and an integral, what they have in common, is that both are unavoidable for the validity of the prayer. I'm talking about prayer here, but really this is broader than prayer. The only reason why the word prayer is right here is because we're in the book of prayer. Otherwise, really, this is broader than prayer. What's common between a condition and an integral is that both are unavoidable for the validity of a deed. Prayer, fasting, marriage, etc., etc., etc. But in particular, prayer, since that's our focus here. So both might be called an obligation. You could call a condition an obligation. And you could call an integral an obligation. So that means, yani, you need to be paying attention so you understand what's meant when something's said. Thus, sometimes an integral might be loosely called a condition. Sometimes they might say, and this is a condition. They mean this integral is unavoidable. They might say about an integral, this deed is a condition. And what they mean is it's an obligation and you can't leave it out. They don't mean it's not an integral. So you just have to be mindful about how things are. Yani, what's meant by things. You can't understand things, understand words and sentences very rigidly and very stiffly. You want to understand things smoothly, like flowing water, like how water flows between cracks and between rocks and goes around things, goes under things, goes between things. Water's fluid, loose, versatile, not stiff and rigid. The difference is that the condition is outside of the reality of the deed, while the integral is part of that reality. So I think that's clear. Abu Shuja only mentioned 5 prayer conditions. He only mentioned 5 prayer conditions. Some already have been mentioned. Knowing the obligation. That's a condition for prayer. We mentioned it already. Not believing that any of its integrals are voluntary. We mentioned that condition already. If you don't remember, then review. And now we have more conditions, such as purification. Since purification of all organs from minor or major impurity, when able, is a condition of validity. Yani when you're able to purify yourself from the minor impurity by making wudu, or the major impurity by making a ghusl, then prayer cannot be initiated without purification. Not deliberately, not on purpose. You can't be lacking purification and then deliberately initiate your prayer. It won't even be initiated in reality, and that's by consensus. And that's blasphemy according to Abu Hanifa, to start praying without purification deliberately. According to Abu Hanifa, that's blasphemy. Or even not deliberately, mistakenly, you thought you had purification, for example. You forgot you broke your wudu, and then you prayed without purification. Your prayer is invalid due to Muslims' report. لا يقبل الله صلاة بغير طهور. Allah does not accept a prayer without purification. An initiated prayer will be invalidated if impurity occurs. Yani, initiated prayer means you started it validly. You said your takbir with your intention and you engaged in the prayer. This initiated prayer will be invalidated if impurity occurs. When we say, if you start praying without purification, it won't be initiated, so that means it never started. So we're not going to say it will be invalidated. Prayer will be invalidated if you start without purification. We're not going to say that. That implies it was valid so that you could invalidate it. But it wasn't existing, and then you attempted to start it, and then in reality, it didn't even start because you didn't have purification. That's the meaning of it's not initiated without purification. And if the prayer was initiated, so you had purification and you had all of your conditions fulfilled, and then you said your takbir to initiate your prayer, it will be invalidated if impurity occurs, even releasing it while forgetful. Yani, for example, you passed gas, you forgot you were praying, and then you passed gas while you were standing there praying, and you forgot you were praying. Then you invalidated your prayer. And it's not going to be enough for you to say, oh, I forgot I was praying in the first place. Well, let me just finish now. It's invalidated. Or even if it were out of control, like you just couldn't hold it, and then you passed gas, couldn't hold it anymore. Or something else, some other leakage came out that you couldn't hold and you tried to hold it. So it was out of control. Then your prayer is invalidated. Because of the report of Abu Dawood that was deemed fair by At-Tirmidhi, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, إذا فسى أحدكم في الصلاة فلينصرف فليتوضأ وليعيد الصلاة. If one of you were to silently pass gas, then let him go, perform wudu, and repeat. Also, purification from unexcused filth on one's person is obligatory, meaning removal of unexcused filth that's on your person. Your person means your body or your clothing or what you carry while praying. Since God says, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, it means, and your clothing, O Muhammad, purify it. The point being that the body itself is more important to clean than the clothing. Yani, what's the proof that you can't have najasa, unexcused najasa on your body when you pray? Allah says this ayah, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, your clothing, purify it. So if you can't have najasa on your clothing, how would you be able to have najasa on your body? Having your body clear of najasa is more important than having your clothing clear of najasa. And Allah commands you to have your clothing clear of najasa. Then you need to also have your body more so clear of najasa, unexcused najasa. On one's person, as it says up here, unexcused filth on one's person. On one's person includes the limbs, such as arms, legs, or anything else. And whatever moves with the body, like clothing that moves with your body, and pocket stuff, that means stuff in your pocket, or baggage, like you have a backpack on while you pray. Therefore, filth below one's chest. He's prostrating, and there's filth directly below his chest, but not in contact with him. Or filth beside him, yani next to him, has no effect because he is neither carrying nor contacting this filth. So his prayer is still valid. If unexcused filth encounters the body or clothing, even if it does not move with one's body, like inside the mouth or a long dress dragged on the ground, or on the tail of one's turban, this invalidates the prayer. Unexcused filth. This will invalidate the prayer. Unless it were dry and one immediately rids himself of this filth without carrying it. Without carrying it or brushing it off with his hand or a stick. So sometimes they just say without carrying it. And brushing it off with your hand or with a stick is like carrying it. But here we just set it all the way out like that, so it's very clear. Without carrying it or brushing it off with the hand or a stick. So the najasa got on your arm while you're praying. Unexcused najasa. So if it's dry and then you just took your finger and picked it up off of yourself so that you can drop it, this will invalidate your prayer because you carried it. Or if you took a stick just to swipe at it, this will invalidate your prayer because that's like carrying it. Same thing if you went to brush it off with your hand. That's like carrying it. So if unexcused filth encounters the body or clothing, even if it does not move with one's body, like inside the mouth that's encountering the najasa on your body, or a long dress dragged on the ground, it's not moving with the body. The najasa is on the long dress, the part that drags on the ground. So that part that drags on the ground, if you were to bow and prostrate and sit and stand, it's going to stay in its own place. It doesn't move with your body. Still going to invalidate your prayer. Unless it were dry najasa and you tossed it immediately without carrying it and without brushing it off with the hand or the stick or a stick. Even if by tossing the entire piece of clothing means This is going to invalidate your prayer unless that najasa was dry and you immediately rid yourself of it without carrying it. Even if the way you rid yourself of it was by tossing the entire piece of clothing, which is a condition for wet filth. When it comes to wet filth, you would have to toss the entire piece of clothing because wetness sticks. And when we say wetness sticks, this is important. When we say wetness sticks, that doesn't mean that might, yani, in your own mind, sticky might mean something to you that's not meant here. Like if something's sticky on your finger and you put your fingers together, then you have to like put effort to pull your fingers back apart because it's sticky, right? Yeah. But even less than that, like for example, if you add some water and then you put your finger in the water, won't the water stick to your finger? Yes, it does. So what does that mean? It means the water's sticky because it's stuck. And this is the case of wet things. Wet things are sticky. Sticky here doesn't mean gluey. Sticky here does not mean gluey. Sticky means it sticks. So if you had wet najasa on your clothing, then you would have to toss the entire piece of clothing, yani, without carrying it. Like, what if you had a shawl on your shoulders and then the najasa got on your shawl? So you just shrug your shoulders in a way to get that whole shawl off of you. One must wash the known spot of filth, yani, for the validity of your prayer. That's why you'd have to wash it, for the validity of your prayer. If you had najasa on your clothing and you never washed that clothing, you're not sinful for not washing that najasa off of that clothing. As long as you don't use that clothing to pray in it, you can pray in other clothing. And cutting the najasa off is sufficient. Cutting off the contaminated spot is sufficient. But self-mutilation is forbidden. What does that mean? It means, what if you had najasa on your skin? If you took a razor and you cut your skin off that has that najasa, then you will have removed the najasa, actually. You will have removed the najasa. But you're mutilating yourself, and that's haram, so you can't do that. If you did remove the najasa by a mutilation, then the condition is fulfilled. The condition of removing the filth is fulfilled. Now, don't ask me if you bleed or something. That's different. Don't mix things. Now we're not talking about bleeding. We're not talking about new najasa. We're talking about the removal of the najasa for the validity of your prayer. What if you had some najasa on your body or somewhere, like, let's say, an unexcused tattoo? An unexcused tattoo, that's najasa if you didn't know. So then you said, I'm tired of this najasa on me. Throw that razor over here so I can cut this patch off of my skin. So you can't cut yourself like that. That's haram. But what if you did and you removed the najasa? Then you fulfilled the condition of removing the najasa. So don't get mixed up there. If you have a question, go ahead and ask. If the filthy spot is unknown, then washing all of the body or clothing is obligatory. This means if you knew you had najasa on your body somewhere, but you forgot where, or you knew you had najasa on your clothing somewhere and you forgot where, or you weren't sure exactly where, then you'd be obligated to wash your entire body or wash that entire clothing, a piece of clothing, not your whole outfit, just the piece of clothing in question. And ijtihad is insufficient in this case. And anyone who's unable to acquire water or soil prays without purification to honor the time and then repeats. Furthermore, one must not stand or prostrate in filth while praying, due to the command to avoid filth, and due to the prohibition of praying in a filthy spot like a cemetery or a slaughterhouse. What's filthy about a cemetery? What's filthy about a cemetery is that sometimes graves get redug, yani, get redug, opened back up again. And so then when you do that and you start turning the soil because you're opening the grave back up, then some of that soil is going to be contaminated with najasa. Najasa that comes out of the rotting corpse. Maybe there's blood, maybe there's pus, or maybe there's other things. So, if that body is decaying in the ground, let's say it did decay. So it took 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to decay in the ground. So there's going to be najasa in there. And what's the cemetery going to do? The cemetery is going to make use of its space. So it might sometimes open up an old grave because it's expected that the first one is unoccupied now. And by doing so, Yani, in the process of that, they'll be turning the soil and digging up some of the contaminated soil. So then refrain from praying in a cemetery. That doesn't mean if you choose a spot, you're going to have to assume that there's najasa there. No, you're not going to assume there's najasa there. You prayed somewhere. So one must not stand or prostrate in filth while praying. However, filth under, due to the command to avoid filth and the prohibition of praying in a filthy spot, like a cemetery or a slaughterhouse. What's the problem with a slaughterhouse? If you've ever been there, if you've ever been to one, then you know. Yani, they're killing a lot of animals there. That means there's a lot of blood and a lot of najasa on the ground. So don't pray there. However, filth under a carpet. So you're praying on your prayer carpet and there's najasa under your carpet. You're on top of the carpet and there's najasa under your carpet. Your carpet is in the middle between you and some najasa. So filth under a carpet or on its edges, on the edges of the carpet. So you're praying on the carpet and there's najasa on the edges of the carpet. That's valid prayer. Or you stepped out or on the feet of furniture one prays upon. Filth on the feet of furniture that one prays upon has no effect. So if you were praying on a bed and this bed has 4 legs and one of those or more than one of these legs was sitting right in the najasa. So is it valid for you to pray atop this bed? Yes. And the fact that the legs of that bed are in najasa doesn't affect the validity of your prayer. A common burden is pardoned, like bird droppings in the masjids and elsewhere, as well as what is unavoidable. What is unavoidable is also pardoned, like the dirt road. The dirt road is unavoidable. So you might say, so what, that means dirt is najasa? No, it doesn't mean dirt is najasa. So the implication there is that there's najasa in the dirt. Like, what if there's a humble town, a humble village, and they have a dirt road, and they have animals, and this dirt road is the road that all the people use for this village. So that means that when somebody's trying to take his sheep to the pasture or he's riding his horse or his camel on this road, on this pathway, they might just defecate and then that defecation gets kicked around and smashed in, etc., etc. I'm just trying to give you an idea here. So now this dirt road it is contaminated, but this dirt road is unavoidable. So you're gonna walk through it because you can't fly, and unless you want to wait till you become a wali so you can fly, if Allah enabled you to fly, of course, as a wali. So without those stretches there, we're gonna say it's unavoidable. Then if you did have najasa on your shoes, for example, you don't have to wash it off. You can just pray. However, Ibn Rif'ah put it nicely, if there were no other place available. Yani saying these cases that are najasa, like Khalas, don't worry about Ibn Rifa''s statement here. I won't explain that either. But you should know that sometimes right here where we are is where the scholars start listing excused najasa. But that talk about excused najasa in this book, The Sweetness of Fiqh, is put in the book of purification, in the chapter of najasa. Not here in the book of prayer. But scholars have put talk about exempted najasa in the book of prayer. So you know. And we'll stop there. SubhanAllah, seems like I've only been talking for 10 minutes. Next condition of prayer is covering. So we have nice information there. Wallahu a'lam, we'll stop there. Do you have any question I can answer for you? It's not recommended to pray in the cemetery. Is it haram? It's not haram by itself. Just because it's a cemetery. It's not haram just only because it's a cemetery. Rather, the nation of Muhammad is allowed to pray anywhere on earth as long as it's not najasa. The thing about the cemetery is that it's a place that it's expected to be contaminated with najasa. That's why there's an issue there. Not that it's haram just because it's a cemetery, but that's a place that's expected to be contaminated. With a prayer rug, then he'll be okay because, like we said, if there's a najasa under the prayer rug, meaning the prayer rug is between you and the najasa, then your prayer is valid. طيب سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك